another episode of the Technicals podcast. This is a show interviewing people in different technical fields to be able to learn from their story, life experience, and hear whatever advice and tips. There we go. That's the word. Tips that they may have to be able to give to aspiring programmers or people who are just entering into the field. So today I'm very pleased to be joined by Goodgis.
How's it going?
Going well. How about just kind of introing? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I am a graphic designer full-time, but most people know me for my YouTube channel. I have a game development YouTube channel where I make games. Right now I've been doing a series where I'm just making games in different languages and engines. But I'm also obviously a game developer, and I'm currently working on a Metroidvania called Dewdrop Dynasty. I've been working on it for almost 4 years. It's embarrassing, like, amount of time that I've been working on this game, but it is coming out this year. Mark my words. But that's about it. I try to encourage people, inspire people to create. I had a great community growing up that really encouraged me to create. So that's really what it's all about. It's having fun and just learning. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah. That's great. And I can just say, from my perspective, you've definitely done that well, because you were one of my encouragements to create and do all of this sort of stuff too. So,
that's awesome.
Your videos were one of the first stuff that I found where I was like, wait, you can make games? And I was like, so,
oh yeah.
Yep. No, and it all just went from there. But yeah. So I guess we can just kind of get right into your kind of story and all of that. So kind of starting from humble beginnings, what kind of got you into programming? How did that all start?
Yeah, it's actually interesting. The story is a funny one because it was actually a sleepover when I was I'm trying to think, like 7 or 8 years old, and a friend of ours, he basically said, "Hey, I just found this thing called Game Maker, and you can make games with it." And my first reaction was, I'm like, "That's the dumbest thing ever." And I literally, I kind of ridiculed him for it, just because I don't know, I didn't really think about like how cool that would be to actually make games. So my brother and my friend got into it, and they started making these little games in Game Maker. And shortly after, I was like, I gotta start doing this. I think, I say I was 7. I was probably older than that. I was probably like 11 or 12, because I started programming when I was 13. And I was horrible at it, like just absolute garbage. I've always been more like artistically inclined than programming wise growing up. So that's kind of where it all began. And we just from there were like we wanted to make games. Super inspired by like Nintendo 64, like GameCube era. Like we just want to make games like Nintendo, and really it's just been a journey to do that ever since. There was a season that I kind of stopped, and I went to college, became a graphic designer, and that's, like I mentioned earlier, that's what I've been like doing full time. But then in like 2015, I really got back into programming again. I met someone in college who was a like successful game developer, and he basically encouraged me. He's like, "Hey, don't give up on this. You should get back into it." And shortly after is when I started getting back into game development, and I actually started to learn how to properly program, and like, because I never knew how to properly do it growing up. Because I just I started programming on a air-gapped computer, so it didn't have the internet access. And so if I had I couldn't look up tutorials or anything. I just had to read the manual, and I was like, of course, like I was like 12 or 13 years old. I'm like, I didn't want to read the manual. So I had a really bad background with programming. So then in 2015 and stuff like that, I really I started to learn C#. I started to learn Python. I started to learn these actual languages. And obviously, like I mentioned, that now I'm on this quest to learn all these different languages. And so I really have just kind of fallen in love with it. I love the problem solving with programming. And it's a fun journey. That's for sure.
Oh yeah. No, especially, like learning and picking up new stuff. I feel like programming, it has such a big, like, there's so many languages and so many different things that you can do with programming. It's like endless, the amount of things that you can create and stuff. So how did you kind of like learn those languages and kind of grow that knowledge? What was kind of your method? What were some resources or tools or whatever that you used to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I like I mentioned at first, I didn't have a ton of resources. I remember I used to go to the library and read like I got a book on Java when I was young, and so I would try to read books on Java. But like I don't know if anyone has had success with reading books on programming, but it just feels like so unintuitive. Um, so I think what really helped me was more recently. I think I got an app on my phone when I first started getting back into it to learn Python, and even that is kind of weird because it's more so like you're learning syntax and you're learning some stuff, but it's hard to like it's really weird to program on your phone. Um, but I started to watch like CS50. Those are really great videos on just the fundamentals of programming. I also got a C++ course. Like I started doing like tackling hard languages because I'm like, if I can figure out how they do it in these difficult languages, like really simple languages like Lua or Python, they're gonna be like stupid easy. And that's kind of the truth, but you know, there's more nuance to them than that. But so watching videos, you know, trying to take classes if I can, but and just reading as much as possible. But I feel like unlike most people getting into the field, you know, if you're going into a tech field, most people learn a language first. And I think I learned like a game engine first. You know, I learned Game Maker and then learning Godot and all this stuff. So I knew how programming logic worked from making games, but then I need to go back and I still need to brush up and understand how to do certain things. I need to go back to C. You know, that's like go back to the basics. So
Yep.
maybe eventually I'll do that. Or assembly, who knows?
Yep. Is that going to be the next video? Is making a game in C?
Yeah, it's gonna take a year to make.
Yeah, no, literally. So I know you kind of already mentioned you are like a graphic designer as your
Yeah.
full-time stuff, and you've been doing that. What is it kind of like going at programming and learning that and doing it practically from that kind of more almost like creative and artistic perspective?
It's actually, I know there's like the stereotype, like either you're a programmer or you're an artist, and it's kind of a fine line between the two. But I don't know. I've never had a problem between switching between the two. Like I said, there was times that I would lean on my art instead of my programming. I guess I still do that. Like at times, like I may not have like the best formatted code, but the visuals, I can make it look nice, so it gets the job done. But I remember in college, like we took a web design class, and you know, just a bunch of artists, and most people couldn't figure out how to like make their website, and like how do you do this? So I remember like having like a line of people sitting next to me, like, oh, Mark, you gotta help me. How do you make this web page and stuff like that? So I think you need to have a curiosity to become a programmer, and you got to love to solve problems. And I think that's maybe one thing art and programming has in common is like that idea of like trying to solve a problem. But yeah, I don't know. I love how they're so opposite from each other that it's like really refreshing going back and forth between the two. Some people might disagree. Some people might be like, oh, art is so stressful or programming so stressful. But I've gotten to this place where both are equally fun, and I don't want one without the other. So that's why I feel like working on games is such a perfect blend between the two worlds that I'm in. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that explains it well, but yeah, that's kind of how I feel about that.
Yeah, no, I think it really does, because that's something that like I've noticed. That's why I kind of like bring up the topic, is because I'm like, I kind of got into programming and art at the same time. Like it was the same motivation for me, which was I want to create, I want to make things.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's that desire. So it seems like almost like artists do have kind of like an inclination to that, and vice versa.
Yeah,
Maybe
for sure.
maybe even this might actually be an interesting point of discussion. But maybe it's easier to be an artist and start programming than being a programmer and start making art. Maybe
it could be like, because I know some people, like a lot of people say like I'm not artistically inclined. They'll say stuff like that, but really art is just like it's It's hard because like if you get something wrong in programming, it's like a math problem. Like you can look it up,
Mm,
you can be like a plus a, you know, a plus b equals c. But so it's very like literal. Where art is, it's all about training your eye, and so it's more
mm,
abstract. I think that's where people they don't know how to improve their art skills other than like doing the fundamentals and things.
mm,
So I do think sometimes people like programmers coming into art can have a hard time because they want a like a very literal approach to it. And there you can do that. There are some ways that you can learn art that way. Where I feel like if you're an artist, you have all these abstract concepts that it is like it can be easy for some artists to transition over. But I know some that like I don't know, they really struggle with programming. They just can't grasp the you know the logical side of how these things work together. I mean, I
mm,
don't think most artists are great for math, like notorious for no, being good at math. And not
mm,
that programming is math, but I just feel I think it's like the problem solving. But honestly, I think
mm,
people just put themselves in a box. Like I believe that everyone can be an artist. It just takes practice and patience. And I think
mm,
anyone could, you know, be a programmer. You just like same thing. You just gotta put the work in, and you got to be willing to be stretched. You know, to do something
mm.
different that you're comfortable with. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So kind of like in this journey, you know, of making all of these things, even making all these games. I mean, you already mentioned one moment where you kind of like gave it up, like whenever you started really pursuing graphic
yeah,
design, it just kind of like was put on the back burner. But were there other times throughout your process of it where it was just like you got burnt out and you were like really discouraged and you were like, I don't think I can do this right now?
yeah. There's it happens more times than I like to admit, but it is
Mm,
hard. I think um, being being in this field, like game dev, is such a hard business to be in because everyone wants to do it, and
mm,
there's I mean it's a big market and there's room for everyone. But there's just so much. I think the only thing harder than game dev would probably be like making a movie. Like the amount
mm,
of things you have to do. Like you got to market, and then you gotta make artwork, and you got to write scripts. You got to be a good story writer, and you got you know like all these things um, come together. It's really challenging, and
mm,
sometimes you can get frustrated or overwhelmed. Like I always tell my brother, it feels like when we're working on Dewdrop, it feels like we're climbing Everest, and we think that we're halfway, you know, halfway there or all the way to the top, and we look and we're only like we look up and we're not even like a tenth of the way there. Like it
mm,
just it's very daunting. And I think that I used to be a person that was like notorious. I had the reputation for like changing hobbies like every 2 weeks.
mm,
I don't know if you've ever read The Wind in the Willows, but there's a character, Mr. Toad, and so like a friend of mine calls it Mr. Toad syndrome, where this character he literally would be obsessed about things, and then like a week later it would be something else.
mm,
So I had Mr. Toad syndrome really bad. Um, but working on a game like for a prolonged period of time, even though it's been hard, and there's moments that I have been like, oh man, do I want to do this?
mm,
I feel like I've grown from it because I'm like,
mm,
it's helping me be disciplined and stick with something for a long period of time. And it's crazy. Like I've never been able to do stuff with projects in the past. A couple of years ago,
mm,
that would have been unheard of. But now it feels like, I guess what I'm saying is tough times, they grow you and they help you develop as, you know, not just as a developer, but also as a person.
mm,
And,
mm,
and like, when I was going through the Kickstarter, I'm trying to think of like another moment that feels like pretty low point. When we were doing the Kickstarter for my game Dewdrop, it barely got funded,
mm,
and that was a tough time for me too, because like when you work on something and you're putting all this energy and this focus and stuff behind it, and you really want people to love it, and to not understand why things don't perform as well as they do. And then obviously, for those who don't know, I had an amazing comeback and I got funded, I think like in the last 24 hours or something like that. It was so
oh
close.
yeah, no, I was watching
Um,
it. It was very, very
yeah,
close.
it was stressful. It got to the point where like the last week of that Kickstarter, I was talking with my friend Bonzo, and I'm like, dude, let's start like thinking of ideas for our next project, because if it didn't go through,
Mm,
um, it was my way of like gauging interest for the project. And it's funny
Mm,
because now I look back at that version of the game of Dewdrop, and I'm like, I wouldn't have backed it. Like the version, like the game is like 10
mm,
times better. It's so different
mm,
that I feel like the Kickstarter was premature. But anywho, so I guess what I'm saying, there's tough times. And I think like with anything, like there's no hobby, there's no passion, there's no job you're going to have where you're not going to get sick of it or just feel like, why are you doing this? But ultimately, I think my passion to create experiences for people is like the number one goal, and it brings me
mm.
back. Even if I get away from it from like a week or a month or whatever, I'm itching to get back by the end of it. I'm like, I got to make something. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's like I'm remembering it was a video that you did with Reese Geoffroy. It was actually one of your very early ones, but talking about
yeah,
determination and all of that. I think that's the you mentioned both. I think those are the keys to kind of like perseverance in those things is that straight up determination where it's like, I'm just going to do it, but then also that passion and that love.
yeah,
And I think that that's really the key, because if you really don't love something and if you're not in it, I remember, I mean, heck, I'm just, all of the anecdotes from your YouTube channel are just flowing into my memory. But yeah, I remember you saying once of that, like treat making a game like a marriage, where
it
it's
is.
like,
Yeah,
if you don't truly love and are dedicated to this, don't do it. And
yeah.
it's that's I think that's a good way of like looking at things, but really as well just having that kind of determination and just punching through stuff, pushing
You,
through it. But
you got to stick with it no matter how hard it
mm,
is. I know a lot of people, I think they think it's going to be fun the whole way through, and it is. Like it's fun working on projects, but man, there's days that like I don't feel like working on it. I feel like
mm,
I'm watching TV or something. But you do it, and it's the most rewarding thing when you push through those tough times and
mm,
things start to flow. It's like the best feeling ever. So
oh yeah, oh yeah. On kind of more practical note for that, are there some like methods or habits or anything that you found are helpful for you in overcoming that kind of wall of motivation and just being like, you know what, I'm just going to work on it?
yeah, that's another great question. I feel like the best thing, two things that are super helpful that are overlooked. Number one, get a notepad and write
Mm,
down a list of like things that you can actually do and cross them off. Now you can use like notepad on your computer or whatever, but it doesn't have the same effect of you actually crossing something off on a piece of paper. Like
mm,
there's something super profound, and there's that like healthy dopamine that comes with that. I think you have to figure out like obviously what works for you, what motivates you. But if you're really stuck, if you're really hung up on a project, and this happens to me, you hit creative block.
mm,
There's two reasons you hit creative block, or I shouldn't say there's two reasons. There's one main reason you hit creative block, and that's normally you are producing more than you're consuming. So I know we like
mm,
consumerism is like a bad word. People are like, oh, don't be a consumerist, but literally, like there's studies that show that if you don't consume enough, if you don't see enough, if your brain doesn't have enough data to process, that it starts to hallucinate. So it's actually
mm,
healthy to look at things, but
mm,
it's obviously it's unhealthy when that's all you're doing all day long. So when you're feeling burnout and you're feeling tired, watch a movie that inspires you. Like last time I was feeling really burnout, went through and watched a bunch of like Studio Ghibli films, or play a
mm,
game, or read a book. Like diversify, go out, hang out with some friends, do stuff, just get away and kind of clear your mind. And you gotta bring in more stuff. So next time you sit down, you actually have ideas again. Because I feel like a lot of
mm,
people like, oh, I gotta be productive. I gotta just keep going. Got to keep going. And you're like, you get to a point, your brain's just like, I don't even know anymore. You just like
mm,
your brain's done with decision making. And that's actually a trick artists do. Is will like if you're gonna design something, the day before you actually design it, they'll just look at a bunch of images that are really inspiring. Like they'll just make a mood board and stuff,
mm,
and that's it. The next day, a lot of times they won't even look at those same images again. But your brain naturally, like subconsciously, picks up on all those things, and when you start creating, like you have those influences will like be in your work, and you have no idea that they're even in there. So And the
Mm,
last and most important thing is if you're stuck, you have to make something. Like if you don't make something,
mm,
you're going to stay there forever. The sooner you do it, the better. And like there's times, those are normally the toughest times when you're like, oh, you're just stuck. You haven't had any good, healthy dopamine from like creating something and being proud of it, of that accomplishment. And you just like there's been like a week or two that I've worked on something and it feels like I made zero progress and super disheartening. But
mm,
what I did is I told my wife, I'm like, all right, I'm going to work on this for a couple hours and I'm not going to stop until I make a little bit of progress. It could be something simple. It could be whatever. And doing that, you feel so good. And then you're like super
mm.
motivated again. So push through the hard times and get inspired, watch things. And you gotta consume as much as you're creating as well. So those are my best tips I would recommend. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's really really great stuff because that's like we need to. I think that's something that a lot of creatives kind of fall on, like trip up over, especially after seeing like the dream stories of people working like 16-hour work days for months on end to get their indie game out or whatever. Is that
yeah.
we can often forget that we're humans and we still need some rest and to kind of
Oh yeah.
like take a sec to kind of get things together. We can't just work for that long. We need that sort of rest, and that can oftentimes give you the best work. Because like if
Yeah.
you just stopped sleeping to work 24 hours a day, everybody knows that that would not work out well, and your work would not be you would not get more work done by doing that. But people tend to not apply that to other things where they're like, oh, no, no, no. Like, I just need to work as much as I possibly can. Where probably the best thing that they need to do is maybe just sit down and watch a movie or something like that,
Yeah. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's a weird thing because you feel, especially when you have the deadlines and things, it feels stressful. It feels like you shouldn't be taking times to play games or whatever. But it honestly, like, you'll waste way more time trying to work when you're not motivated and you're like, oh, it's just like a slog, instead of just taking a break, even take a day, or and relaxing and getting inspired again, or just be bored, like whatever it is, like just take a break and come back to it, and you're gonna be like 10 times more productive, hands down. So
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, yeah. So kind of like going back to a little bit of your experience and stuff like that, what are some of like the projects that you've worked on and the kind of experience that you've had more specifically as far as like engines and languages and stuff like that? Where have you kind of explored?
yeah, so I mean, I've tried a lot. I started out, as I mentioned before, in game maker 7 way back in the day, and then when I got back into game development, I used Construct 2, or Construct, however you want to say it. And that's like it's like a visual scripting engine with, I think it uses JavaScript as well. And I used that for a while. And then eventually I was like, I need to actually like learn a proper engine. No offense to Game Maker, but like something that had like more substance to it. And I still love Game Maker, so no hate in the comments. And so that's when I found Godot. Actually, a friend of mine is I don't know what his job title is exactly, but he's basically a programmer for a living.
Hmm.
Um, and so he uses a lot of Python, and he told me about Godot. So I'm like, I'll try it out. And for those who don't know, like Godot it's a free and open source engine, and truly is like the best engine for the cost. Like it's $0 and it's no strings attached. It's incredible, 2D and 3D. So once I found out about that, that kind of became like, I kind of became obsessed. Actually, the first time I used Godot, I hated it. I was like, this is so dumb. I'm just going to go back to Construct. Little did I know. And so that's mainly what I use. And you can use like C# and C++ with Godot. I use the built-in GD script, which is great. People hate on it. It's not that bad, people. It's great. But I've used way back in the day, I used Unreal. And then I used Unreal so long ago. It was called like UDK or something. I don't know which version of Unreal that was. I've used Unity, and like never liked it, as a lot of people can tell from my videos. Not a big fan. it's just like a clunky experience for me. Um, and I'm trying to think what um, I've pretty much used all the major game engines. And then, like I said, I've been doing this series where I've always wanted to make games without like just like a framework without an engine. So this series has been really fun on YouTube, just making games in C++ and Python. And I'm trying to think what else I've done. Or a lot of Scratch games.
Mhm,
I guess it's
mhm,
not really a framework, but I would love to do like Java
mhm.
and Golang, and like there's all these like obscure ones, Rust. A lot of these I've like kind of messed around in my own time, but I just think I don't know. It's like I don't know if anyone's a Linux user out there, but there's something so satisfying about like trying different distros when you're on Linux. And I feel like that's the same way with programming languages. You're always like, oh, what's Ruby? What's Ruby
Mm.
like? And I tried out Ruby for a day, and like it just and it's you get a lot of times you get the same results, but there's something like super interesting about seeing the syntax differences. You can almost get like nerdy about it and not end up making anything at all, which I'm guilty of. But um, but I think, like I said, it goes back to that curiosity. I think it's important to try things out because you're not going to know what you like. And obviously, I've settled down with my engine, but a lot of people don't know what they like. So don't settle until you guarantee that that's what you want to be using. So
Yeah, and that kind of goes back into the curiosity aspect of all of
yeah,
this, which I think is kind of a key thing. Like another guy that I interviewed used the term of like seems like most programmers share a tinkering mindset
yeah,
was the phrase that he used, which I think is a very very good one. It's just like, ooh, I wonder what it does with this, like,
yeah,
ooh, I wonder what this does,
yeah.
and it's yeah. So you kind of mentioned you've been doing all these sort of languages. What has been like your favorite one to work with? Maybe if you want to get spicy, which one was your least favorite to work with
Uh,
for all these languages?
Yeah, that's another great question. I think hands down the worst one was C++. Like I was really looking forward to C++, that video specifically. Um, I think it's just the framework. It was like a little bit too far beyond uh, like where I was at, and especially when you're the
Mm.
pressure. There's a lot of pressure when you're making videos because you're learning this framework, but then you're trying to record yourself learning, and then it's stressful because you're like, oh, I gotta pick this up fast then. Um, so I think that video was hands down like the most time I put into one of those videos was that C++ game, and it
Mm.
was like barely anything happened in it. Um, I think probably one of my favorite languages I messed around with was Python.
Mm.
I'm like I know people hate on Python, but I really do like it. It's so simple. Um, and it's probably because it's very similar to like GD script is based off of Python. That's probably why I like it too. It feels the most natural. Um, but I've messed around, and you'll actually, I'm trying to think. I don't know if this will come out before the video or if not, but my next one's on Lua. So my next
Ooh.
video is on Lua, and I really enjoyed using Lua. So I guess I'm more of a fan of like simpler scripting languages, just because it's the artist in me or something. I don't know. I don't want to get too technical, but I want to try more. Like I said, I definitely will do assembly, even if it's like 3 years from now. I want to try it. I'm just so curious. Like, why is it that hard? It's I guess it's a challenge. I think that's what it
Hmm.
is. Part of it is like the challenge of like, can you create something with it? So I
Hmm.
don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And there's that problem solving thing again.
yeah,
Like I remember that was I heard once someone say like I like why game development is so like appealing to a lot of programmers and all of that is because it's like the ultimate problem. It's like
it is.
like
Yeah,
because like like just from small games that you make, you start it and you're like, okay, I want to make a game like Flappy Bird or whatever,
yeah,
um and then you're like, okay, so what do I have to do? It's like, okay, so I have to code it all, figure out how to do it, I have to make all of the art, I have to make all the sounds, all the music, I have to publish it, I have to market it, I have to everything. And it's just like it's such a giant problem, and yet it's so appealing to people because it's a
it is.
challenge, you
There's
know.
it's easy to get like like kind of get addicted in that world too of like, oh man, we could have this thing and then this character and then eventually we can sell a t-shirt with his face on it. Like there's just, you're really creating a world. And I don't know, I just think it's such a fascinating like art form, I guess. That's kind of how I consider it, is it is an art form. And like I said, it's like a movie, except for I think it's a lot easier than making a movie. Like when they made Lord of the Rings, like I don't even want to like begin to think about how Peter Jackson did everything, because you just have so many moving parts. So it's like that. It's like a simple movie. It's kind of what you're making.
Oh yeah, no, and that's something like I would love to talk about this. We can talk about this for like ever. Is games as art. I think it's so like, because a lot of people, there's that perspective where it's like, games are just like a waste of time. Like it's just some frivolous thing that people do to waste their life away or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's a certain type of playing games where it's like, okay, you're playing Call of Duty for 12 hours a day. Maybe that's not the best thing to do with your life,
Yeah.
But like I've thought about like a game like Celeste, like I played through Celeste and I was like, that was like amazing. Like I did it in like an afternoon because it's a pretty short game.
Yeah.
But I was like, it felt like I just watched a movie, and yet I felt even more invested because I was in it almost,
Yeah.
And I gather
That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the Earthbound, the Mother One, soundtrack right behind you, and I know like I played those games too, and they're like, it's another one where it's just like, it's incredible. There's something about games that it's like it's deeper because it's like every art form put together, and then like even better because it's like it has that level of immersion and interaction and stuff too.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, like you were saying, like how people view video games as a time waste, and it is interesting because like people will spend their lives watching sports and stuff like that. Like, oh, that's normal because it's the exercise and stuff like that. I'm like, but are you playing on the team? Like, oh no, I just watch it. It's like, well, it's like the same thing, And so, and you're right. Like there gets to a place where it can be unhealthy if you're just doing the same thing all the time. But like, it's funny how some of the best games ever made aren't necessarily like the most fun, because there's like games that are just addicting, like Vampire Survivors. Like that game's addicting, but then there's other games like Paper Mario. Like maybe the gameplay isn't as addicting, but like the world and the immersion and the story, like it is. And those have like profound impacts on you. Like I feel like games that I played growing up, like Ocarina of Time, like I still think about it. I still think about the music and the world that they created. And so I think that's what the powerful thing that games can do is it really can make you feel an emotion. It can inspire you. It can encourage you. I mean, some games also can make you really depressed. That's most Metroidvanias. I feel like,
yeah.
But so like you can do, and I think that's what like it's important as creators. Like you can make something really positive that, inspires people to want to, do more stuff. Like I can't tell you how many games have inspired me to do like real world hobbies. I know it sounds so lame, but like it actually, I feel like it can be a positive thing. And so I think that's why it's important that, I mean, everyone has a unique like story that they can tell, and making a game is such a great way of doing that, and presenting that story. So it's super addicting. It's super addicting to work on, and they're super addicting to play. And like you even said with Earthbound, man, like those, it's like that game hit me in like a profound way that like some movies never did. Some movies like, oh, you gotta watch this, is gonna change your life. I'm like, eh. So you never know what will have an impact on your life, and that's why it's just such a cool art form for sure.
Oh yeah. I literally I restrain myself to listen to the Undertale soundtrack. I have to only listen to it on like special occasions, because I will get teary-eyed whenever I listen to that soundtrack. Because it's just like, I love it. Like I swear, like I listened to it on my birthday. I was like, I'm gonna treat myself, and so I'm just gonna listen to the Undertale soundtrack. But it's incredible, especially the music. I think that like that's one area that I think is like so often overlooked a lot of times too. Like whenever I tell people, like I just recently went to a concert where it was a jazz band playing some video game music,
Oh,
and
that's awesome.
whenever yeah, it was great. Whenever I told people about it, and they were like, "What the heck is that? That sounds stupid." And then like, and then I like show them. I'm like, "No, this is actually what the music is," and they're like, "Oh, okay, that's actually amazing. Like that's actually amazing, beautiful music." You know,
Yeah.
but it has that
Yeah.
stigma still.
It is interesting. I feel like video game music is probably one of the most profound things that like when I think about a game, a lot of times I think about its soundtrack, and
Mm,
it hits different when you hear it again. You're like, like you were mentioning Undertale. Like, I think part of the reason Undertale did so well was if it had like a bad soundtrack, I don't think it would have had the success that it did. But the fact
mm,
that Toby Fox is such like a brilliant composer, and it's funny when it first came out, I was like, all right. But the music won me over, man. The music is literally the reason I bought the game. Um, so I think there is a part of like, um, like you said, it's something that's like really overlooked. And think about it, musicians. They have their whole career off of just making music. So it makes sense that like
mhm,
creating a game that has that atmosphere and has that music is going to make you, want to come back, and you're going to feel something from it. And it's nostalgia. When you hear it again, it takes you
mhm,
back to the good old days. So yeah, it's a
mhm,
powerful thing
mhm.
for sure.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And so kind of like I mean we've talked about like most like a lot of different aspects of game dev, but from like a kind of day to day, what area is your favorite to work on for your games?
Uh, I feel like, obviously this is gonna sound like cop out, but artwork probably. Like there's times like when I'm making mechanics, like programming mechanics, I love that. Super addicting. But I feel like artwork is still, well, it's hard. It depends on what the art is. Like if it's menus, like
Mm,
even though like like that's why I went to school for is like UI and stuff like that. I feel like that's always the most boring, most obnoxious thing in a game.
mhm,
Really, my favorite phase, I should say, in development is polishing. I love the little details.
mm,
I love making something look kind of like that's something that's stiff and kind of awkward and making it feel super satisfying. And I think that's been the struggle with Dewdrop is that I'm not at that phase to like finally do all this polishing. I keep trying to do it a little
mm,
bit. I'm like, no, stop. I'm like, we'll get back to this. And I know once we get to it, like it's already like been a blast to work on, but I know that part's gonna be like so fun because then you see all this like chaos slowly come together, and you're kind of shaping it, you're molding it.
mhm,
And even when I design, that's how it is. Like when I create an illustration, it looks really bad, and then it pulls together in like the last like 10% of my artistic journey on making this piece. It all comes together, and then it looks beautiful. It's like a grand reveal, and so that's probably my favorite phase. I haven't hit it like that much with games because I haven't like released that. Problem is you have to
mm,
actually like finish a game to get to that stage, or you make a nice, really fancy prototype, which I've done a bunch, but then you have no
mm,
substance to it. So, yeah, it's easy for me to jump the gun on that, but it's just because it's so much fun. So,
mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And do you think like is it valuable? I'm sure you would say yes, but like, is it valuable to kind of work on those side projects and have those kind of passion projects? I know you've had like you've worked on various like MMORPGs and stuff like that. That
yeah,
you're like, this isn't my main thing that I'm working on, but
yeah,
it almost seems like and I know you said you have like kind of have that like Mr. Toad syndrome, of just jumping around. But there's a
yeah.
like, do you think there's almost a certain sense of that that's healthy and
Oh yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I feel like at first I used to think it was a weakness. Um, I think here's where people get in trouble with it. I think like working on a project and announcing it like here's my new game, and I would do that, and I'm definitely guilty of that. I think what you should do is view it as a prototype. Don't
Mm,
call it like, hey, this is my latest experience or whatever new game I'm working on. Really what it is, it's prototyping, and you're
mm,
having like it's really healthy to just try something and make it weird and like I want to make this game, and like I don't think through it all the way. Just make something. Um and then it's okay if you don't finish it if it's a prototype. And I think actually using Dewdrop again as an example, we didn't prototype enough early on. We just kind of like jumped into it, and because of that, we had to rework a lot of things. We had to like remake a ton of things because we didn't think through it, because we didn't really prototype like, hey, what's this unique hook? And so I think making side projects super healthy, and as long as you like, especially if you're using the same game engine, if you like develop a system, copy and paste it over to something else. Like whenever I was working on Wiz 2 last year, and I implemented this like rolling feature. That's what it was. And I'm like, oh, this is a cool feature. I should add this to Dewdrop. And so I literally like quickly added that feature into Dewdrop. And just based off that code and I wasn't intending to add like a rolling mechanic like that originally. So I think it's really important to experiment. I think it's really important to create. And I don't like, you should share it if you want to. But yeah, just don't, it's hard to do that when you're already like managing a big project, but sometimes you need to. And I kind of view like when I work on videos and I have these coding, like little coding challenges I do, I kind of view that as my side projects a lot of times, because I literally am stopping development to work on this game for a couple days and then get back to work. And it is really like refreshing. It almost like you almost reset. It like resets your brain. It helps you get away from what you're working on. And when you come back to your main project, you're like, oh, wow, why was I doing this? This looks terrible. I need to fix this. Or like, oh, this is great. Why am I being like weird or insecure about it? So I think it's healthy. Just don't have like 5 of them at once. I feel like I've done that before because it's just too much to manage. Like realistically, you can't work on 12 projects at once unless you're like Shigeru Miyamoto in his heyday and you're a producer or something like that. So that's my best advice on that for sure.
Yeah. So obviously, like, you know, you have a lot on your plate already, like with Dewdrop and full-time job and all of that. How do you like balance all of that and not go insane?
It's a challenge, that's for sure. I think it's just being realistic about expectations. Like there's seasons where my full-time job is just crazy busy and I just don't get, you don't get much done. And that's hard because you're like, like I feel the pressure. I know that there's people excited for this game. I'm excited for this game, or people are excited for new YouTube videos. But you can't be too hard on yourself because, like we said earlier, if you just push yourself, you drive yourself nuts. So I try to take like frequent breaks. Like if I'm working a lot, I'm like, all right, I'm not working on. If I'm working a lot on my main job, I'm not gonna work on Dewdrop this week. I'm just gonna relax. Another thing too is like, because it's a balance. It really is a balancing act. And honestly, it's kind of like the worst feeling ever when you have like a huge, tremendous pile of work, but before you can even get started with that, you have to do this pile of work and this pile of work, and it's like sometimes it feels like you're trying to like I don't know, dig yourself out of a hole while someone's like digging even more dirt into it. So, but yeah, I don't know. It just, there's a weird saying that how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And I think about that all the time. I've never tried elephant, nor do I want to, but it really is, you just take it one day at a time. And, and a big thing I do is I rotate between like working on a video and then Dewdrop and work on a video. And it just kind of gives you like a break. So you're not just doing the same thing all the time. And I don't know about you, but like, I can't work on like 3 things in one day. Like I can't design here. And then I'm like, okay, now I'm gonna work on Dewdrop. Now I'm going to work on a thumbnail for like this. It's too much. So I try to like, this day I'm just going to work on this thing. And this day I'm just going to work on that thing. And it really helps because if you finish that task, then you're like, okay, cool. Take the day off, do whatever, or work on another aspect of like YouTube or game dev. But like, you're not jumping back and forth and switching hats, and you'll just get tired just by doing that. Like you'll waste so much energy just by bouncing around from task to task instead of just batching it together. So it's a challenge, and I'm sure there's people that are like trying to do game dev that have even less free time. So I mean, just be realistic about what you can do, and don't beat yourself up if it takes 4 years to make a game.
Yep. 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 Yeah. And one practical thing, at least for that, because man, it's been a struggle, especially because I making the adjustment from not working to having a job was a
Yeah.
massive, massive undertaking. I think that's for everybody, especially whenever you're trying to do a lot of work on the side. But something that I'm not sure about you, but something that I found very helpful for that is like if I get home from work and I'm like my brain is still on work mode, I'll just take like a 30-minute nap and it
Oh
resets my
yeah.
brain.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Don't underestimate the power of a nap. I've never been a good napper, like ever, my whole entire life. But ever since I had a kid last year, or had my daughter,
Mm-hmm.
I've learned that naps are powerful. Even if you don't fall asleep, even just to lay there and give your mind a break. I'll do that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, like in the middle of the day, and you feel like ready to go. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that is very good advice.
Yeah, yeah. You just have to find ways to reset your brain because that is the batching
Oh
thing.
yeah,
Because that's the struggle is that you literally have like different parts of your brain for doing different tasks,
yeah,
and switching between them so much is very, very, very tiring.
oh
Um,
yeah.
but so yeah, yeah. Kind of for this like game dev stuff for somebody who's interested in it, maybe have done it and stuff like that. Do you think that it's a career worth pursuing as like a full-time gig, like going to try and like support a family with it?
I feel like if you do it the right way, that it can be. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Hmm.
There's a lot of people that quit their job, they quit everything. They're like, hey, we're just gonna try to do the game dev career, and I think that's scary. Like I'm sure people are successful, and I'm sure people like make a game and boom, they're set. But for me, that's like terrifying. I'm like, quit my job and do this like before you know it's guaranteed because like I
Hmm.
said earlier, it's a very competitive field, and most people that make their games like don't make money from it. Like before I even did
Hmm.
YouTube, we had like some success. Some people were interested, and when we started making Fantasy World our MMO, but like other than that, like it's really hard to make it a career if people don't know who you
Hmm.
are. So my advice that I always give is try to do it while you're working full time. Like
Hmm.
that's what I've been modeling, and we'll see how successful it turns out. But I think doing it that way, it takes the pressure off of if you fail, like especially I've my wife and my daughter. If something happened and it failed, then it's like, well, what am I going to do now? And it's
Hmm.
so and that pressure and that anxiety that it puts on you, I think it's just going to hold you back from actually being more creative. You're gonna start playing things really
Hmm.
safe. You're gonna start acting desperate. Like the one thing that anyone on the internet can smell is desperation, and like
Hmm.
your videos will tank. Everything you do is it starts to tank when you're desperate. So you need that like healthy like playground of like, hey, like that safety net of like, oh, if this doesn't go through, it's just a hobby. It's fine. Um, but think about it. Once all you need is one successful game, mildly successful game, and you could have like a decent living and a decent career off it.
Hmm.
And obviously, this come from my background. One thing I recommend if you want to do game dev and you want to go full time is you want to diversify where your income's coming from. So
Hmm.
start promoting it on social media, start a YouTube channel, do something. Um, that way, like you got to market your game.
Hmm.
You want to market your game, and if you can make money on YouTube while marketing your game, then that's just a bonus. Like it'll set you up. Like if you're I don't know if your game doesn't do as well, you at least have some sort of income, and like you have a chance and you can grow an audience that maybe your next game will do even better. Or maybe if your game doesn't do well, you can pivot. You can try something else. You can try selling a course, you can do something, and that gives you the funds to get back in and try to create it. But ultimately, this and obviously this I always say this, you have to make sure that you love making games. Like
Hmm.
I've been making games for since like I was 13, and so it's like 15 years, and I didn't, like obviously there were some breaks between that, but like I have always loved doing it even when I made no money. There's times I was losing money just working on games, like paying for the servers for Fantasy World, and people would send in donations, but even then we still were like losing like $500 a year on that game. And I didn't care because I mean, I cared, but like I just loved working on games so much that I just wanted to be in that field. So don't be ashamed. Don't be embarrassed if you're working your full-time job or you're doing something to support yourself through it, because like you never know. And at least, like I said, you're not like pulling out a loan and be like, I'm gonna like refinance my house to do this, and like don't do that. You're gonna set yourself up for like if something did happen and something flopped, you're gonna I can't even imagine. That sounds horrible. So just be smart about it, and it's gonna take longer if you do that, but you're gonna find it's gonna be a lot more rewarding in the long run. So yeah, go for it. Do it.
Sweet, man. Yeah. Yeah. So kind of wrapping things up a little bit, I always like to end with this question for these people. But what kind of advice would you give to someone who is like wanting to get into this field, whether just general like programming, design, work, even just specifically game dev, but they don't really know where to start? They're like, sounds fun, sounds cool, sounds like I would want to do it. What should I do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing you should do is just start doing some research, like watch a video. Don't underestimate the power of tutorials. Like even with art, like a lot of times the way you learn an art style is you literally just copy it. Like you take the original piece. I mean, this is what people go to museums and they literally try to repaint like these masterpieces so that they can learn from them. So when you first start out, obviously don't be hard on yourself. Try making Pong, try making Flappy Bird. You know, you don't get too caught up on the assets and trying to make something original, and follow along with some tutorials. And eventually you'll get to a place where you can start making something unique and creative and put your own spin on it. But I think the number one thing that's going to motivate you to stick with it is to get in a community with people that are interested. Like, I think what really helped me is, my brother and I have always been obsessed about making games. And even though the friend group that we have, they're maybe not always as excited to make games, like they still are super passionate about playing games or talking about it. And some of them like could never wrap their head around the programming aspect, but they always wanted to be part of like the journey. So we'd just make projects together, and they were terrible and some of them were great, but like, but having that friend group of people that can encourage you, and like my brother and Bonzo are like that for me. They're always messaging me like, hey, what about this? Like, hey, we should create this. And just encouraging you through it. You're going to go like anything in life. Like if you're learning a language, it's way easier if there's people around you learning a language. So you need to find that group. And if you don't have people around you to encourage you, that's when it's great to like connect with people online, do a game jam. I know it's sometimes awkward doing a game jam with like strangers and be like, hey, can we be in a team? But you can there's a lot of people that are in the same spot as you that want to be doing what they're doing, like want to be making games, and they're just looking for, someone to connect with to partner up. So take advantage of communities and take advantage of YouTube, watch some tutorials and just do it. Don't make excuses. So after this video, get started right now. So
yeah, great stuff, man. Yeah, thanks for taking the time to come on and be on my humble little show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah, of course. Well, thanks everyone for watching. This is the end of the podcast, so my intros are not fancy or anything. Goodbye.